Hi, my name is Kevin Rowland, and I am the Mainstage MD. Now, I get a lot of questions from people asking for my advice and help on creating difficult patches in Mainstage, particularly in musical theater. And I myself come across a lot of difficult patches that I really have to think about when I'm programming for theaters. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was programming a show and I came across a patch that I thought would be a perfect example of this. So I created a challenge in the Apple Mainstage Keyboard Programming group on Facebook about this particular patch. Now, if you're not a member of that group, I encourage you to go over there right now and add yourself. There's a lot of very smart people in that forum. So the challenge was to take this particular patch that I came across, and this is from a show called Catch Me If You Can. This is in the keyboard 3 part in a song called Don't Break the Rules. Now, if you look at it, it's not very difficult to play, but there's some very specific articulations, including this brass tremolo, as well as a rip into the inversion of the chord. Now, just for a frame of reference, this bottom staff is just timpani, and we are in the key of E. So the left hand is pretty easy to figure out. But what we're going to deal with in this particular challenge and how I approached it is just the top line right here in the right hand. So before I show you how I did it, let me pull up the concert and I will show you in action just how it's done, or just how it sounds. Pretty neat, huh? I think even the brass players in your orchestra would like that. So this wasn't very difficult to do, but it just took a little bit of thought on how to create this. So I'm going to walk you through how I did this. So in the future, if you come across something like this, you'll know that it's doable. Now, as great as Mainstage is, we know that Mainstage doesn't have everything. And one of the things that Mainstage lacks is various articulations for live brass, big band brass, pop brass, Hollywood brass, those types of things. And you're not going to find any flutter brass in Mainstage, or even tremolos for that matter. So if you tried to do this by hand, it would not sound very good and certainly would not sound very authentic. And even if you did a glissando up into the downbeat of 10, that would sound pretty terrible as well. So I'm going to show you exactly how I did this. And you will need a DAW, a digital audio workstation. My preference is Logic Pro X just because it plays so nicely with Mainstage. So I'm actually going to come over here and mute this for the time being. And you will notice that in Logic, I've come up with 2 tracks, 2 channel strips, one for each of the chords here in the patch, measure 9 and then measure 10. So you'll notice that here I have a brass shake, and then over here in measure 10, I have the brass rip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I did this. So I created a channel strip and I opened up a version of Contact, or an instance of Contact rather, and I am using for this particular patch Session Horns Pro. And this comes with the native Complete Ultimate 12. Of course, you can buy it separately as well if you don't want to buy the entire bundle. But what I love about this is that it has different presets for all sorts of instrumentation, and it's got saxes and trombones and trumpets. It's really amazing. It even has a tuba in here. Sax and brass sound pretty good, so you can change these defaults. But for this particular example, we're going to just use the brass section since that's what it asks for. Now, if you come down here to the key switches, you'll see that there are various articulations that you can choose from, including rips, which we're going to use in a moment, and of course, the brass shake. So we're going to come and choose brass shake. And if I play that chord live, here's what it's going to sound like. Okay. Now, if I come to the brass rip, and I open up my version of Contact there, you'll notice I already have it set to rip right there. And now I'm going to play this chord in the downbeat of measure 10. Now the problem with that is that there's a rooftop accent, so I need to make that a little bit shorter once the rip reaches the apex. So here's what that would sound like. And that's much more what is written in the orchestration. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to record each of these. I'm going to go back to the brass shake, and I'm going to record that. Sorry about that. That is the wrong track. Let's go back to the brass shake here for a second. All right, here we go. Now, you'll notice that I recorded this just a little bit longer, and the reason that is because the player is going to choose, or the player is going to be playing with the tempo of the band, and whenever they cut off, that will cut off. So it's always best to sample more than you actually need. So I'm just going to go in here and edit this real quick and bring all of these to the downbeat. And I'm going to mute that track, and I'm going to come over here to my brass rip, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to record the downbeat of measure 10. And that's all that's involved with that. So if I come and I put this down here and I play them together, it should sound like I want, except this chord here in measure 9 is going to be just a little bit long for now. All right, so far so good. Now, we see that there's a forte piano in this measure right here, and you can tell from what I recorded, it's all the same volume. So having a good DAW is really great for this, and all the major DAWs, whether you're using Logic, GarageBand, Digital Performer, Cubase, any of those will have this feature in here. So I'm going to mute the brass rip for now, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and add some markers for the volume. And what this allows me to do is I can adjust the volume globally, or I can also have different points and set these points for changing the volume. So what I'm going to do is we're going to bring this back down to 0 dB or close. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a point for the forte piano. We know the attack is going to be forte, and somewhere right around here is going to be the piano part. Maybe 8 dB would be good. And then we're going to start an immediate crescendo back up to the original volume, somewhere like this. So this is what this should sound like. All right, so I want to bring this, and you'll have to adjust this to taste, obviously. It just sounded a little fake to me. So if I bring it to here, here's what we got. Perfect. And I may even want to delay the crescendo just a little bit more. Perfect. And I don't really need to do anything else because the rip sounds great just as it is. If you are using a DAW, you will have to adjust the beginning point of this so that you don't have any dead space. So I'm just going to bring all of these to the beginning. And so now when I trigger that, it's going to trigger right on the downbeat. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to bounce these out to audio files, and I'm going to do that right now. And so I will spare you watching me having to do that, so I'll be right back. And we are back. So I have bounced the audio files that we just recorded in Logic so that they are ready to use and create our very own EXS24 instrument. Now the benefit to doing it the way that we just did is that by bouncing it down and using it as an EXS24, it's going to be much better and much easier on your CPU usage on your computer. Now you can use third-party libraries directly within Mainstage as a plugin if you wish, but depending on what kind of specs you have, that could really slow your computer down. That particular sample library, the Session Horns Pro, is pretty hard on a CPU. It has about a gigabyte of RAM just to use that particular library by itself. So I would encourage you to do it the way that we just did it. Now that those are bounced down, I'm going to come over here to Mainstage, and I'm going to create a new patch, new channel strip, new instance of EXS24 sampler. We're going to come over here to the edit. And right now it's just a blank instrument. So if I try to play anything, it's just going to give me a sine wave. But I'm going to come over to edit, and this is where I'm going to load my samples. Now you can do this a couple of different ways. You can create a new zone. You can drag and drop, which is what we're going to do. So I'm going to come over here to my Finder window. I've created a folder with these two audio samples, one with the brass rip and the other one with the fluttering brass, as I call it. So we're just going to take both of those and drag and drop them right into the sampler. And then I can shut this down. The first thing that we want to do is get rid of all of the checkboxes here. We don't want pitch. We don't want one shot. And all we need to do is assign where these samples are going to get played. Now, what I've done is I've taken the fluttering brass, and if you'll look at this, you'll notice that the top note is a G sharp. So I'm going to just move this to the G sharp right there, the G sharp 3 above middle C. And I'm going to take the rip, just because I think it's easier to play a half step above, and I'm going to use the lowest A on the piano, or the lowest A in this chord rather, the A3 in measure 10. Now I always like to bump the volume up by about 6 dB, and then we're just going to save this, and we can call this the brass flutter. All right, now that's saving, and now we have a new instance of this brass flutter patch. One thing to keep in mind is when you're creating your own instruments, the ADSR envelope down here, this is the release envelope, you might want to put this up just a little bit. So if I play for you the brass rip using that A, you'll notice that if it's down, it just kind of cuts off, doesn't sound authentic. So we want a little bit of a reverb tail, if you will. Maybe just a little bit more. There you go. So that's our rip. And if we play the G sharp 3. Okay, so that was a little bit too much of the release for... You'll notice I let that go. So this is going to have to come down some. Probably some more. So that makes the rip a little bit dry. So what I need to do here is probably just put a little bit of reverb. And I've created a bus channel here with some reverb. I can punch that up to there. And voila, you have your patch. So if I go back to the original in my show, what I've done here is I've given instructions for the player to play the fluttering brass on the G sharp and to play the rip on A, and then the timpanis are down here at the bottom. So here's the final product. And that's how I do that.